Yesterday, you had a cool experience. You went to Reds Media Day, which is where the off the bench people were at. I don't know what the official was.
I think the thing that I got invited by one of our sponsors to go with them to a corporate event. So the cool thing is that it wasn't really. I don't think that the players knew that I was. In fact, I will say this: the players didn't really know who anybody was. There was one player that has played in the league for quite some time that somehow knew who I was and in Chatterbox in general. And he had mentioned that he's just a big baseball fan, which is why he knew. But the cool thing about it is that I think he shared to me a lot of insight into the way that some of the players feel about the way that the game has gone down and where it's headed. And I guess ultimately it's made me starting to think through the league as a whole and what happens with Major League Baseball. Because I think that there's a lot of people that love baseball that still have a place in its heart for it. It's just that they have come to the realization at some point that they feel as if they're fighting an uphill battle within the fandom that they currently have. And I'm not suggesting for a single second that there should be pessimism when it comes to this upcoming season, but let's face the facts that are Major League Baseball as a whole. There are complete, discrepancies between small market and major market teams. And the question ultimately comes down to is whose fault is that? My thought on all of this is, simply put, you play by the rules that you're given. You shouldn't be discriminated for going out and trying to put your team or your organization in the best chance to possibly be successful ever, under any circumstance. And the Dodgers have done that. And they've done it to such a high level of a degree that you now, I believe, have people starting to question whether or not this is something that's sustainable. And people have been beating this drum for 5, 6, 7, 8 years now that it's probably not sustainable over the long haul. But similar to what some have said, let's do what's best for the game, that's not what's best for the players' pocketbooks. So you find yourself in a tough position, I think, as a player. And what I think over the conversation I had was essentially Major League Baseball at one point, and I think the game that some of us grew up loving, was a little more art. It was a little more art than just execution in regards to just being a strict hardline thing that this is what it is. And the guy was, I don't keep referencing as the guy, but the guy was talking about how analytics are one part of the equation. It's not the whole part. The other part is the fact that you have ABS and or whatever you want to call it, the strike zone in general,
right,
has made it to where there's only one type of pitcher nowadays that's going to be able to have success when it comes to the strike zone. And when the strike zone is smaller, right, it would lead you and tend you to believe that ultimately the advantage would go to the hitter. And I mean, we all would agree, right, that the smaller you make the strike zone, the hitter should have more success, yeah? But the way that it was presented yesterday was kind of a unique way of looking at this, is that pitchers with less velocity were much more apt to being able to be successful because they could earn a certain part of the zone as a strike, yeah?
Rules are rules.
I'm just saying
yeah, you're right.
That is what they considered
right.
as a pitcher. Right. I can find a way to convince this umpire that if I hit this spot for long enough,
correct,
it'll be a strike.
Correct.
Greg Maddux is probably the perfect example of that.
Right.
But what's happened is you have a strike zone that is very rigid, and players have decided that the only way they can continually get guys out, depending on, it doesn't matter the health of their arm, it doesn't matter anything other than just straight velocity. And what that's led to is guys focusing directly on velocity rather than just trying to have the art of pitching. And that has then led into the idea of being able to maximize your potential over a short span of time versus trying to actually, what I would consider, I guess, becoming a long-term pitcher based off of being savvy. And that was their perception of it all. I'm not saying that's the right thing. I'm not saying it's wrong. I just think that they feel like that's the reason that pitching has become what it is because many of the guys in the league feel like if you're not throwing 95 plus with the way the strike zone is, you're not going to be able to be successful.
Well, it's for a long time. It's like height in basketball. Velocity equaled easier path to success in baseball as a pitcher. Like, yeah, you could make it as Greg Maddux throwing 88 to 90, but if you threw 96, you had a much easier path to. You didn't have to be as artistic. I had this conversation with somebody about baseball in as an art and everything like that, and why it feels like it has changed so much, because it has. When analytics and not bunting, but shifts and pitchers throwing one, that's a big thing now too.
Yeah, one pitch. You
learn, hey, I've got an elite slider, I've got a mediocre fastball. I'm throwing my slider 90% of the time. All of that came into the game because it was successful. It was how you won. It was a better way to play. It was a better way to win the game.
Yeah.
In the same, we're seeing this in basketball too. The reason that you watch an NBA game and they're just chucking up threes all the time is because that's how you win the game, right? 3 points is worth more than 2. That's simple math.
Yep.
The reason that we see analytics, guys that get on base, guys that shift to one side of the field, guys that throw nothing but sliders, is because it's how you won games. It was a competitive advantage. Never along the way did we ask the question, hey, this is entertainment?
Exactly.
This is entertainment. Yeah, that's how you win the game, and I get it. This is a competitive sport. That's how you're supposed to win it. But you never ask the thing like, this isn't a whole lot of fun to watch. This isn't a whole lot of fun. You know, the people that pay our bills, this isn't a whole lot of fun for them. And that's where you're having to see the MLB kind of step in and go, all right, we've got to make this more fun. We've got to make this, and everyone can bang the table. That's not baseball. That's not baseball. Well, if we don't step in, we're going to see the game evolve to what wins competitively, not what's more fun to watch. And I'm in favor of, hey, let's do things that are more fun to watch. You know what's fun to watch? Pitchers going 8 innings. The reason pitchers don't go 8 innings anymore, 8, 9 innings, is because when they get to innings 7, 8, and 9, they're not very good. You can bring in a relief pitcher that's going to throw 99 to 100 that's more likely to get the outs than your starting pitcher. That's the reason we don't do it anymore. It's not because there's some conspiracy that, hey, the analytics, this is what the kids want. No, that's how you win games. And it's not fun to watch.
And I think that everything that you just laid out is exactly really where Rob Manfred finds himself. And I know people have given him a significant amount of criticism, probably rightfully so. But my thing would be, instead of focusing on so much from Rob Manfred's spot, that is, how can we make the game more enjoyable to watch? It is going to get superseded by, there are only so many teams that have the capability of being competitive that you're going to lose a certain population of fans in a lot of different cities. And although, yes, I know that if you added up Pittsburgh, you added up Cincinnati, you added up Kansas City, and let's say you added up Tampa, those 4 franchises probably still fail or have less fans than the New York Yankees.
Right.
So maybe from an overall global view of it, you're saying, well, really, I can't say this out loud, but, you know, if the Cubs, the Mets, the Dodgers, the Yankees, I'm sure I'm missing a couple, but if they're relevant and they're good, this league's fine. We got plenty of fans that watch from just those 5 teams. And I would say that you're missing the bigger picture. And I would hope, and my hope is that instead of worrying about the rules and the time and all of these things that very much need addressed.
Yeah, you got to artificially create the game the way it once was.
We have to get back to, there wouldn't be as much complaining if it was and again, I get it's hard to do. I get that Major League Baseball Players Association is the strongest union in the history of unions, but you're going to have to get back to a point where everybody on opening day feels like they have a real chance, which is the reason the NFL is successful. You can say that it was made for TV. You can tell me that people just like football more. And you know what? That may be slightly true in certain aspects, but that if you're the leader of Major League Baseball and you're Rob Manfred, you cannot go about your business with a second-class natured feeling. You can't look at it like, well, we're just never going to be the NFL because we're not football. Like, it's a different sport. They like football more. You've got to find a way to recreate the things that the NFL has done really, really well and put them within your sport and hope that that helps generate more and more eyeballs. Because we all know that baseball is regional, but at one time it wasn't regional. And I get that maybe there's more entertainment options than ever. I'm well aware of that. And maybe back in the 1950s, you really didn't have much of a choice but besides watch the 5 channels that were on your TV, and baseball just happened to be one of them. And that's the reason that Major League Baseball at that time was a national game. But the main thing that many people are going to become very disinterested in when it comes to Major League Baseball, and it's by far the biggest problem, is the inadequacies of each individual franchise. And what you're going to find yourself in an argument with is this. And they all have valid points. There's 3 of them. You have the players themselves, you have the big market owners, and you have the small market owners. And you have to ask yourself, what do each of those have that is a pro and a con? The players have every bit to sit there and say they are worth whatever someone's willing to pay them, because this is America, and that is 100% true. That's the way that this country is ran, and there's nothing wrong with that. The small market teams are then going to come in and say, well, the truth is that we have to run this like a somewhat of a sustainable business. And I'm not here to defend the Castellinis, but they have said we run this like a nonprofit. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. I'm not here to argue that. But if, let's just say, that is the best case scenario that a small market fan base could hope from their ownership group, is that they don't make any money. Whatever comes in, they put back into the product. The problem lies is that if you did that in the NFL, and if you do that in Major League Baseball, you're going to have some people who have billions of dollars to spend, as we know, and some that only have millions. And at some point, just like capitalism that we find ourselves in this country, which again, I'm pro-capitalism. But my point is that this is a product that is entertainment first. Mm-hmm. It's entertainment first. And the truth is that they've got to find a way to get back to making it to where it is entertaining for every single team in this league. And yes, there's going to be some teams that are like the Browns and the Jets that can never figure it out, and they're dysfunctional and they don't know how to find ways to be successful. But if they want to find a way back to relevancy nationally, and they'll always have a stakehold, it's Major League Baseball. But if they want to become a national game, they're going to have to make it to where the talent that exists in 4 or 5 cities is spread out through the entire league. And you have real storylines each and every year about who's going to have to go where and what you're going to have to do this offseason, because you only have X amount of dollars to spend. The salary cap is the only way. It's the only way that Major League Baseball becomes nationally relevant again. And if the players don't want to hear that, that's fine. But I'm telling you right now that we have to find a way to compensate the players fairly. But more importantly, make the game as a whole fair. Otherwise, I'm here to tell you, if you want to say as a player that you care about the game and you love the game and you want to farther this game, there is no better sacrifice that they could make than to find a way to try to make baseball fair again for all clubs. And they might have to take a little bit of a hit, yes. I get it. The players are going to have to take a little bit of a hit. But I got news for you. There will not be, you can mark this down now, and I will guarantee it, there will not be a season the next time there's a CBA in 2026. There will not be one. Because the only way to save Major League Baseball is for the small ownerships groups to rally together and say they're not doing it. It's the only leverage they have. Because the truth is that Major League Baseball has entered the era now. And I'm not suggesting that the Dodgers are to blame. They're not. They're doing what's best for them. And I'm not suggesting that Cohen with the Mets is to blame, because they're doing what's best for them. They're abiding by the rules. But the truth is that this is going to be treated like a hobby, and that's what it is for some organizations. If this is treated like if you go to a guy that's got a lot of money and they're like, "Hey, do you want to check out my cars?" And you're like, "Yeah, sure." And then they open up their garage and they got 50 cars in their garage, and you're like, "Wow, this is a pretty big hobby. My hobby's riding a bike." Your hobby just so happens to be having $4 or $5 million worth of cars because you have that luxury. We have found ourselves now in professional sports with Major League Baseball where this is a hobby for some. And I'm not saying that that's their problem, but it's Major League Baseball's problem. And they better get damn to fixing it fast. Because if they don't, there's going to be entire generations of youth that, quite frankly, aren't going to watch the sport because the team that they love never are relevant. Never are relevant. It's going to be hard to convince my kids, and certainly their kids, to watch the Reds on a daily basis when you're projected to win 77 games every single season, and you turn around and you watch the same other organizations and they're projected to win 105. Not because they can scout better, not because they have a young prospect system that comes up, but because what they're capable of doing is saying, you know what? The Reds, they went out and found a kid at 18 years old named Elly De La Cruz that nobody ever wanted, and they gave him $40,000. He ended up being a world superstar. He kind of got his feet wet in the big leagues at the beginning of his career. Was a pretty decent player, fringe all-star type player. His last year or two with the Reds, all-star, maybe a superstar per se. But then you know what? During the prime of his career, we get to have him. And if you don't think that's a problem, then I would say you're missing the whole point of what it is to be a fan. The same reason people don't really love college basketball the way they used to love it, because you can't follow a kid when he starts as a freshman and you see him finish as a senior, is the same problem that Major League Baseball is going to have when the smaller organizations have zero chance. And I don't mean a little bit chance. I don't mean 0.001. I mean 0.00% chance to sign their superstars to a long-term deal. When the Pirates don't even consider trying to give Paul Skeens a big contract, when the Reds virtually have no chance of keeping Elly De La Cruz, you have to ask yourself, what's the point? Why are we doing this? And that's not my problem to figure out. It's Rob Manfred's problem to figure out in Major League Baseball. And if there's not a season come 2026, you can point directly to that as to why. And we'll see what ends up happening. But don't be shocked when it happens. A whole season gone, because the small ownership group has one thing that they can hold on to as leverage, and that would be it.
The only thing that I agree with you wholeheartedly about everything. They need to be salary cap. They need to do all that stuff, because the way that we're going is unsustainable. It's really interesting that the Reds, the Cubs, a lot of ownership groups have come out and said that they make no profit, that they literally just try to break even, which is quite honestly how most companies work. They just keep increasing their valuation. They don't actually make a profit. They're just like, hey, we're worth this much now. The only way in which I think that we will actually see change is the Dodgers creating a dynasty. Because to this point, the one thing that has always curbed Major League Baseball is that Major League Baseball has had the most different number of champions over the last 20 years than every other professional sport, because the sport itself is random.
Correct.
Because the sport itself is random. When we see that gone, which it might happen, we might see like the Dodgers stack up a roster so great that even the randomness of baseball can't beat it, to where the Dodgers sweep every series in the postseason. They win 130 games. Even the randomness of baseball loses. That's when the game will change. And I don't know if we'll see it, because we've seen great teams. We've seen the Yankees stack up on teams in the mid-2000s and don't get a championship because of it. Yeah. We've seen the Dodgers, like they make the postseason every year, but they've won what? One championship last year and a Mickey Mouse one in 2020 in the last 40 years. The only way that we'll actually see change is when the randomness of baseball loses out.
That's fine. And Craig brings up a good point. He says salary cap is never happening, and that's fine, because there was a lot of people that said Sears was never going to go out of business. Blockbuster had no chance of going out of business. Could you imagine telling your great-grandfathers that Major League Baseball would be arguably, maybe at one time, the third most popular sport in this country? I think they'd probably laugh at you. See, the thing is that when you look at life finite within a window of opportunity of maybe 1 year or 2 years, it's really hard to see the change. When you step back and you think 20 years from now, what does this look like? It becomes a little less clear. And all I'm saying is that as someone who is a part of an organization that talks sports, started up a company that quite literally, this is what we do. And you have a relatively successful show that we do in Chatterbox Reds. And I find myself more worried about whether or not it's not the job that we're going to do. I'm not worried about whether or not that Craig, Nick, and myself can do a good job of doing a podcast. I'm more worried about whether or not there's a fan base of fans that are going to continue to be interested in something that might eventually show that it's got zero chance or close to a zero chance of happening. So what you're going to start getting is more and more bandwagon fans, which is fine. I'm not gatekeeping of how you want to be a fan. But the truth is that at some point, you can't invest this much time into something that seems like it's an impossible task to get to. And that's the worry that I have. Because the truth is at one time there was a salary cap in Major League Baseball. It just was called economics. You couldn't spend this much money because if you did, you were going to lose a bunch of money because you didn't bring in enough revenue. And you know what? The randomness of baseball was big enough because you couldn't get a good enough team to eliminate the randomness of baseball. So we just kind of hung our hat on the idea of, you know what? I know the Yankees got this guy. I know the Dodgers got this guy. But if you look at their WAR and you take in the actual real statistics of them, I know they're not a superstar, but we can replace them with a platoon player that's somewhat similar to this. Well, what's happened over the course of the last few years is the same teams that got an edge because they were trying to be smarter than everybody and use the analytics to their advantage, well, guess what? The haves figured that out too. And they decided, you know what, we'll do the same thing, but we're just going to spend more money so we have the better platoon if there is one. Or we're going to have the better player here if there is one. And we've come to realize that this is what wins games as well. So the winning the games became a priority. And on top of that, in the last couple of years, a hobby mentality has taken over a few organizations that seemingly has no end. The money seemingly has no end. The truth is that we could all be like the Cubs, for instance, in the division of the Central. We know, and you're a Cubs fan, the Cubs, if they were to sign Jason Hayward to a major deal and he's not as good as they signed him to be, that hamstrings the Cubs just enough to where they kind of got their extra shot at it and they missed, so they're just like the rest of us now. And you could say, well, the same case could be said about the Dodgers and the Yankees at one time. They might get a couple extra shots at the goal, but it's only a couple. And if they miss, they're just like the rest of us. And we have a chance to beat them just as well as they have a chance to beat us. You add in the randomness of baseball over a 5-game series, or hell, even a 3-game series now, and a 7-game series, there's a chance you can get hot and make a run. And that's what we've always argued. We've always been like, you know what, just get in the playoffs. You got a chance.
It's the randomness of baseball.
But the problem is starting to showcase. And if we're going to sit here and just act like it's not a big deal and we're going to be able to brush it aside, that's how Sears goes out of business. That's how Blockbuster goes out of business. Is because at some point you think you're so damn big, no one could possibly take away what is this. And that is what's that's how I feel the way I feel. And again, this is my opinion. I'm not suggesting that I want this to happen. I just look at it all and I think to myself, that is the road Major League Baseball is headed down. And this isn't like a fast thing. This is something we've all slowly seen over time. And at some point, someone's going to have to do something about it. Because if the Dodgers are capable of quite literally spending whatever they want, that's not their problem. I'm not suggesting that it is. But it's the rest of our problem. And if they're capable of dominating a league, and let's just also face the fact that in Cincinnati, we're very fortunate as fans. Because if we were Rockies fans, we'd have no chance. We'd have zero chance. The only saving grace that we have in the Central, and I'm not saying this to take a shot at you, I'm just saying, is that the Cubs don't do that. That you could argue the Cubs have a chance to find somebody like that. And if they do find someone like that, then guess what? This song and dance is over. Because if the Cubs were to do that, and they were projected to win 103 games, that's what the Dodgers are projected to win. That's their over-under. You want to bet on the Dodgers over? They got to win 104 baseball games for you to win. Meanwhile, you look at the Central, and they all basically outside of the Cubs have to win 81 games, 82 games. I think the Reds and the Cardinals are at 78. This isn't a knock on you being excited for the season. I'm not suggesting that I think, it's completely gone. I'm just saying, let's not be naive. The alarm should be sounding as loud as humanly possible that what's going on right now is not sustainable. And maybe it's not sustainable to spend the way the Dodgers have spent. But I don't know if you know this or not, but there's a lot of people that have an absolute boatload of money. You look around the NIL of college football and we laugh and we're like, oh man, how are these guys getting paid $12 million? You know why? Because there's billionaires out there that care about college football and they don't give a rat's tail about $12 million. It doesn't mean nothing. The next time you give $1 to somebody because they need $1 to help pay for a parking spot or something, I want you to think about that interaction that you have, and that's the same type of interaction that these billionaires are going to have when it comes to signing the top reliever. How much does it cost? What, $14 million a year? All right. You think it'll help us win? Yeah. All right. Well, there's $14 million because we don't care. It's irrelevant. That's not always been the case in Major League Baseball. At some point, you had a salary cap because they treated it as a business. That is gone. And again, I'm not rooting for it. But if we're going to sit around and act like the Dodgers and what they're doing isn't clearly obvious a major problem, then I don't know what is.